My name's Henry. I'm 48 now, living in Peoria, Illinois, and I used to think I was one of those guys who'd outlast anything marriage, stress, work, whatever life threw at me. But looking back, I think I'd been outlasted long before I even realized it. My wife, Rachel, used to call me nothing more than a co parent. She'd say it like it was a joke, like we were both just here to run a daycare together. The first time she said it, at a PDA meeting, of all places, I laughed it off. I thought maybe she was just frustrated. Maybe it was her way of dealing with the day-to-day chaos. But it stuck. That little phrase kept cropping up. When I forgot the milk, when I worked late, when I tried to plan a family trip and got the dates mixed up. Co-parent, she'd say, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. At first, I tried harder. I thought if I just made the effort, things would turn around. I'd take the kids to soccer and piano and the orthodontist. I'd come home early, cook dinner, try to engage her in conversations that didn't involve the kids. But Rachel was always somewhere else, mentally checked out or physically absent. After a while, I stopped trying. I told myself I was focusing on the kids, but the truth was I was hiding from the slow erosion of a marriage I no longer recognized. The twist, the thing that gutted me even more than Rachel's words, came the night I found out she wasn't just calling me a co-parent as a joke. She was calling me that because, legally, she was already making me one. It was a random Thursday, and I was supposed to pick up the kids from Rachel's sister's house. I got there, and her sister, a woman who usually couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it, was looking at me like I was a ghost. She hesitated, and then she handed me an envelope. "Rachel asked me to give this to you," she mumbled. I thought it was some bill or school paperwork. Instead, it was a set of divorce papers, neatly folded and signed. She'd already filed. The kicker? The date on the paperwork was 2 months ago. 2 months she'd been sitting on this, pretending we were still some sort of family. 2 months of me thinking we were in a rough patch while she was already planning her next move. That night, I sat in my car, parked in front of her sister's house, staring at those papers. My hand was shaking, but not from anger. Not exactly. It was something colder, a numb realization that I'd been played like a fool, that she'd written me off long before I saw it coming. I could almost hear her voice in my head, that dismissive tone she used when she didn't want to engage. "You're just a co-parent, Henry. That's all you'll ever be." But I wasn't about to let her dictate the terms. The thing is, I didn't explode. I didn't call her, didn't text her, didn't even bother to confront her about the papers. I just sat in that car until the engine's idle felt like a heartbeat, steady and hollow. And then I did the one thing I hadn't done in years. I started thinking just about myself. I went back home. Our home, but really my home, since I've been the one making sure the mortgage got paid and the repairs got done. The kids were already asleep. Rachel wasn't there, of course. She'd probably gone out for her weekly wine with the girls, though I doubted there were many girls involved. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on the wall, the ones we'd put up back when we still believed in forever. There was a picture from Disney World, one from that ski trip where Rachel had broken her wrist but still insisted on posing for photos. I used to think those were memories. Now I realized they were just a gallery of lies we'd told ourselves to keep going. That's when I decided I was done waiting for her to finish the job. I wasn't going to be the man she painted into a corner, the one she could discard when it was convenient. I pulled out my laptop, logged into my accounts, and started moving things around. Nothing drastic, just enough to make sure I had options. I checked our joint accounts, the mortgage details, the kids' college savings. I didn't touch a cent that wasn't mine, but I made damn sure the things that mattered were secured. The twist? I discovered something I hadn't expected. While I was digging through her finances, I found a hidden account. Rachel had been stashing money away for months, maybe longer. Quiet little transfers here and there, just enough to stay under the radar. I almost laughed, a dry, bitter chuckle that felt alien in my own mouth. She'd been planning her own exit while playing house with me. But she'd made a mistake. She'd left a digital footprint a mile wide. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about her leaving me. This was about control. She wanted to walk away with everything neat and tidy, with the kids, with the narrative on her side. But I wasn't going to let her have that. I set up a meeting with a lawyer the next day. Not a loud confrontation, not a screaming match. Just a quiet, methodical consultation. I told the lawyer everything. The divorce papers, the secret account, the kids. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I just laid it out like a blueprint. She listened, nodded, and told me exactly what I needed to do. The irony was, while Rachel was busy painting me as just a co-parent, I was becoming the one who would actually protect our kids from the fallout. I didn't tell Rachel about the lawyer, of course. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work as usual, picked up the kids from school, played the part of the dependable father. But something had shifted. I wasn't doing it for her anymore. I wasn't doing it out of some sense of duty or hope for reconciliation. I was doing it for them, for the kids, and for me. A week after I found the papers, Rachel finally noticed something was different. She wasn't used to me being this calm, this distant. She'd walk into the room expecting the same quiet acceptance, the same predictable routine, and instead, she'd find me reading a book or working on a project with the kids. No questions about where she'd been, no arguments, no late-night talks about feelings. I think that scared her more than anything else. She was used to being the one to pull away, to make me chase after her, beg for her attention. But now I wasn't playing that game. And the thing that really threw her off? The kids. They were happier, more relaxed. They weren't walking on eggshells, waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment or the next slam door. They started coming to me for everything: homework help, advice, even just to talk. One night, after I'd helped our youngest with a science project, Rachel stood in the doorway watching us. Her face was tight, her lips pressed into a line, like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. She didn't. She just turned and went to bed without a word. That's when I knew I had her off balance. And that's when I realized something even colder. Maybe it wasn't me she was trying to leave. Maybe it was the version of me that had let her get away with everything for so long. The real shift came 2 weeks later. Rachel finally decided to sit me down in the living room. Not the kids, not an audience, just the two of us. She said she was concerned about the distance between us, said we needed to talk about where this was going. I listened, nodding at the right moments, keeping my expression neutral. She was expecting me to argue, to plead, to ask her to come back to the marriage like I'd done in the past. But this time I stayed quiet. When she realized I wasn't going to engage, she switched tactics. She said she'd noticed I wasn't contributing as much to the household, subtly accusing me of neglecting my responsibilities as a husband. That was almost funny, considering she'd already filed the papers. She tried to paint me as the villain, the one abandoning the family. But I just calmly said, I've been focused on the kids, making sure they're okay. Her expression flickered. She hadn't expected that. She thought the guilt trip would work, that I'd get defensive. But the more she pushed, the calmer I became. I was done being her punching bag, done being the fallback plan. And I think in that moment, she realized it too. I went upstairs that night, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I felt something colder, something quieter. It was the realization that I'd been complicit in my own erasure for years. I let her rewrite our marriage while I played along, thinking that if I just worked harder, did more, loved her enough, she'd eventually see me again. But she never would. And I think that's when I finally stopped hoping. I didn't just sit with that realization. The next morning, I called the lawyer again and said I wanted to move forward, not just with the divorce, but with custody. That's what Rachel hadn't expected. She thought I'd roll over, give her the kids, maybe fight for weekends and holidays like every other co-parent she'd written me off as. But I wasn't playing her script anymore. I filed for primary custody. And when the lawyer asked if I had documentation of my involvement, my presence in the kids' lives, the financial records, the school pickups, the doctor's appointments, I handed it all over. Every calendar entry, every text exchange with teachers, every receipt from Target runs at 9 p.m. when someone needed poster board for a project due the next day. The thing is, Rachel hadn't been the hands-on parent in years. She was there for the Instagram moments, the posed family photos, the birthday parties where she showed up half an hour late, but still made sure to blow out the candles herself. But the day-to-day? That was me. The homework checks, the bedtime stories, the math tutoring. It had been me all along. When the paperwork was filed and Rachel was served, the reaction was priceless. She wasn't expecting me to fight for them. She thought I'd just let her waltz off with her narrative intact, that she was the self-sacrificing mother leaving the inattentive husband. But now she was cornered. The story she'd been telling herself, telling her friends, telling her family, was starting to crack. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one holding it all together while she quietly planned her exit. And now, finally, I was the one writing the ending. Once the custody papers were in her hands, Rachel's whole demeanor shifted. She went from smug confidence to frantic damage control in a matter of days. The text started first, long, rambling messages about how this isn't what she wanted, about how we should do this for the kids, about how we could still fix this if I just stopped being so cold. She tried calling too, but I didn't answer. Not out of spite. At least, that's what I told myself, but because I needed to stay focused. Every time her number flashed on my screen, I felt a sick mix of satisfaction and pity. Satisfaction because she finally felt a fraction of the panic she'd caused me. Pity because, deep down, I knew she didn't love me. Not really. If she had, she wouldn't have been planning her escape while still sharing my bed. A week later, she showed up at the house unannounced. The kids were at school, and I was working from home, trying to pretend I wasn't unraveling inside. She let herself in, like she always had, and stood in the doorway of my office, her arms crossed, her eyes tired but still calculating. She said she wanted to talk like adults, that we didn't need to make this ugly. But I'd already seen the messages she'd sent to her sister, the emails she thought I'd never find, the quiet inquiries to real estate agents about moving out of state. I knew her version of not ugly meant me stepping aside and letting her take the kids without a fight. I stayed calm, told her we could discuss everything through our lawyers. I watched her face go pale, watched her hands clench at her sides. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I finally realized I deserved more than to be left holding the broken pieces of a life she'd decided to discard. She left that afternoon in silence, her usual confident stride faltering just a bit. And for the first time since this mess began, I allowed myself a thin, bitter smile. After that day, something shifted in the house. It wasn't just Rachel's absence that made things different. It was the kids. They started acting like they could breathe again. There was less tension at the dinner table, fewer forced smiles, more real laughter. They weren't afraid to ask me for things or tell me about their day. It was like they could finally exhale. A few days later, my oldest, Megan, came to me while I was sorting laundry. She hesitated in the doorway, holding a book, and said, "Dad, if we have to choose, I want to stay with you." I swear, my heart nearly broke in half and mended itself in the same moment. I told her nothing was decided yet, that we'd figure things out as a family. But inside, I felt something shift, a quiet resolve. The next weekend, Rachel showed up unannounced again. This time, she had her mother with her, a woman who had always treated me like I was just some placeholder until Rachel found a real man. They sat me down in the living room, the same way you might stage an intervention for a wayward teenager. Her mother did most of the talking about how the children belong with their mother, about how it would be cruel to split them up, about how it's just better for everyone. I stayed calm, let her ramble, let Rachel sit there with that smug little tilt of her head, like she was winning some kind of moral victory. Then, when her mother finally stopped to take a breath, I said, "The kids will have a choice, and I'll respect whatever they decide." That was the moment Rachel's mask cracked. She didn't like that. Not one bit. After that conversation, Rachel didn't storm out or scream, but she didn't leave with her usual air of victory either. She sat there for a minute, her mother awkwardly shifting beside her, and then she quietly said she'd talk to the lawyer. No apology, no real acknowledgement of what was happening. Just the same old deflection, but with a crack running right through the middle. When they left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from a lack of sleep, but from carrying years of silent weight. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. The kids were with me, not because I asked them to choose, but because they were already choosing every day in 100 small ways. That evening, as we sat around the table eating takeout, because I was too drained to cook, the kids talked and laughed like they hadn't in months. It was the kind of normal I hadn't realized we were missing until it returned. And as I listened to them, I realized something else. Rachel had been so focused on controlling the story, on playing the perfect mother who was trapped by the inattentive husband, that she'd overlooked the one thing that really mattered. The kids didn't need perfect. They needed real. They needed someone who showed up, who listened, who stayed, even when things got hard. The next week, the legal process picked up. Rachel's lawyer sent over a proposed custody arrangement that gave her primary custody and me every other weekend. She must have thought she was making a generous offer. Maybe expected I'd be grateful she was allowing me that much. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit for a couple of days. I wanted her to wonder. When I finally responded, it wasn't with anger. It wasn't with a counteroffer. I just sent over the documented proof I'd been collecting. Calendars marked with school activities, screenshots of messages from teachers, medical records showing I was the primary emergency contact. I attached a statement from the kids' pediatrician confirming how often I'd brought them in, how engaged I was in their care. The next day, my lawyer forwarded me an email from Rachel's lawyer. It was short, terse, a request for a meeting. That's when I knew Rachel's narrative was falling apart. I wasn't the absentee father she tried to paint me as. I was the one who stayed. The one who did the hard, unglamorous work of raising our children. The bitter irony was she called me a co-parent, like it was a demotion, but now I was the one standing there with the evidence in hand, showing that I'd been the real parent all along. The meeting with the lawyers was anticlimactic, really. Rachel sat across from me, looking tired and worn in a way I'd never seen before. Her lawyer did most of the talking, making half-hearted arguments about stability and continuity for the children. My lawyer countered with the documentation, calmly, methodically. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heated. It was just inevitable. When it was over, Rachel didn't look at me as she left the room. She didn't have the energy, and I didn't have the inclination to offer any comfort. I realized then that this was the end of whatever story we'd been pretending to write together. It wasn't a tragic ending or even a dramatic one. It was just a quiet collapse, the kind that comes when the last support beam gives out and the house crumbles under its own weight. I walked out of that building with a strange lightness in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something close. Like I was finally stepping out from under a shadow I hadn't realized I'd been living in for years. A few weeks later, the custody arrangement was finalized. I had primary custody of the kids, and Rachel had visitation rights every other weekend. The kids adjusted quicker than I thought they would. I think they'd been waiting for the stability, for the walls of pretense to finally come down. The last time Rachel came to pick them up for her weekend, I stood at the door as they got into her car. She didn't say much, just a quiet nod, a quick, "I'll have them back Sunday night." No promises of rebuilding, no manipulations, no guilt trips. Just the hollow remnants of a life that had already ended. As they drove off, I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of it all settle in my chest. The house was quiet again, but not the suffocating quiet it had been before. This was the quiet of choice, of freedom, of rebuilding. I realized then that Rachel hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated the kids, too. They were stronger than she thought, more resilient. And so was I. I walked back into the house, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a verdict. It felt like a beginning.